I want to thank everybody for making your way here today. For those of you who had to make your way across Bosco Plaza and through the labyrinth of the Union, congratulations, you're in the right place. For those of you who came across Manhattan and then through the labyrinth of the Union, congratulations, you're in the right place. By the way, while I have your attention, I want to let you know that heavy demolition actually starts at 7:30 a.m. tomorrow on Seton. So get up early and have a Egg McMuffin and some limestone dust for breakfast and be really great, or plaster dust as it may be. Thanks for cleaning up. So I want to thank you all again for doing this. So as you're aware, this is one of the year's ECDAL lectures. And let me tell you a little bit about that. Founded more than 35 years ago as a memorial honoring Topeka architect and university alumnus Oscar Ekdahl, the Ekdahl lectures bring practitioners, teachers, critics, theorists, and artists, or all the above, to campus for interaction with students, faculty, and alumni. The lecture series focuses on issues affecting the quality of the physical environment and the leadership roles played by the speakers. The purpose of this series is to inform and challenge, as well as to reinforce and complement the programs embedded in the College of Architecture, Planning, and Design. We are certainly thankful for the continued support of the Ekdahl family in providing this avenue of enhancement to yours and to our education. So, an introduction of our speaker. Goncalo Byrne is a world-renowned architect, graduated from the School of Fine Arts of Lisbon, and carries an honorary degree from the Faculty of Architecture, the Technical University of Lisbon, and from the Faculty of Architecture at Alghero in Italy. In 1975, he established his own practice and founded his firm, Goncalo Byrne Architects, in 1991. He is a practitioner and a teacher. Along the years, he has taught at several universities, including those in Coimbra, Viseu, Lausanne, Venice, Mendrisio, Louvain, Harvard, Milan, Pamplona, and Lisbon. And I think I only mispronounced 6 of those. Recent works include the remaking of the headquarters of the Portuguese National Bank in Lisbon, the resurrection of the Italia Theater in Lisbon with Barbas Lopez Architects, the expansion and the addition of the National Museum Machado de Castro in Coimbra, and so many other spectacular projects, and I'm sure you'll see some of those today. He's been awarded, among many others, with the prize from AICA, roughly the International Association of Art Critics, the Ministry of Cultural Awards for Visual Arts and Architecture. He's awarded the gold medal by the French Academy of Architecture, and recently honored with the Piranesi Prix de Rome 2014 for the National Museum Machado de Castro, for which he is also nominated for the European Union Prize for Contemporary Architecture, the Mies van der Rohe Award in 2015. In 2005, he was awarded the title of Doctor Honoris Causa from the Lisbon Faculty of Architecture, the Technical University of Lisbon, and was awarded the Grand Cross of the Order of the Santiago da Espada by the President of the Portuguese Republic. I don't think he brought the sword with him. In awarding his prize, the International Art Critics said, the Architecture Award was issued unanimously to Goncalo Byrne due to his consistently intelligent approach to understanding urban values and his sensitive formal invention of architectural objects. These qualities are exemplified by his cooperative housing building recently completed in Restelo, as well as his proposal for the Belém Cultural Center competition. Those words are from 1989, but I'm sure you're going to see similar conclusions in seeing the work that he presents today. And I assure you, having dived deeply into his website, that you'll find rich spaces and will, as I have found, begin to plan your trips to Portugal. With that, please welcome Goncalo Byrne.
Thank you very much. working? What's okay? Now is it working? Oh, good. Well, first of all, I want to thank Dean and Professor Tim de Noble for this introduction and for the invitation to come to Manhattan. And secondly, I of course want to also to thank to the head of department, Professor Matthew Knox, who's been so kind and just showing around and visiting Kansas City yesterday. In fact, I must say that it's the first time I'm in Kansas State, in Kansas City, and in Manhattan. I'm quite happy to be there. And finally, I'd like also to thank Professor Victor Renier, who I met last year. I mean, this year, in fact, last year in the spring semester in Lisbon. He was there on sabbatic, and I met, in fact, because he was talking me about Kansas City and, of course, Kansas State University. And I really want to thank him for his great knowledge that I learned so much, but also for his incredible generosity that he showed in discussions with students in our school in Portugal, where we met together. Okay, so now it's I try to manage my time, because in moving forward to start talking about my city where I live, where I work, which is the city of Lisbon in Portugal. As you know, Portugal is a small country, 640 kilometers long by 300 kilometers width. I think it may be smaller than Kansas State. I don't know, but maybe. But we are in Europe. And Lisbon, the capital, it's typical, I mean, European city in the way that it was, I should say, founded more than 2,000 years ago. Most of the main cities in Europe, they were Roman founded when there was the Roman Empire. And this means that the city actually is just started right here. What you see here is of course, it's a Google photo, not so good, from the actual condition of a metropolitan area that is mainly recognizable by the infrastructure system, as the high-speed mobility, the trains areas, the airport, whatever. So there is, in fact, a big expansion. You know, we have two big bridges. In fact, this is Tagus River, is the second longest river from Iberian Peninsula, meeting the Atlantic Ocean right here. It's quite large before, then it goes narrow, mostly 1.5 kilometers. There's a big bridge there. So the history of Lisbon, 2,000 years of history, in fact, starts by putting together the water as a main infrastructure, mobility infrastructure, which was very, very important ever since, even for the growth of the city of Lisbon, together with some activity that would go around there. And then you have, this is exactly on the center, the black spot that I showed, where the Tagus would come like this, and there was two small rivers coming down, and they used to come to Tagus River here. In fact, in the Roman period, the Roman port was here. And the first Roman settlement used this hill. In fact, it's a hilly city, and the center, it's 3 hills divided by 2 valleys. What you see here is a representation of what was the structure on the early, let us say, 12th century, 11th to 12th century, where it's the medieval castle and the original Arab walls. After the Romans in the 7th century, there is the Arab occupation of Al-Andalus Caliphate. And they take place, most of the Iberian Peninsula, and Lisbon is an important city in that moment. And it's of course a walled city, like all medieval cities. Normally they say, friends, good guys are inside, bad guys are outside. So communication between the city and the outskirts is through doors, including the communication to the waterfront. It's doors that normally are closed by night. But then there's an expansion growing with a whole city that goes around. This situation, of course, has changed a lot. This is already the late medieval city. As you see, the castle is here. The old Arab quarter is still called Al-Fama. It's a typical organic, labyrinthic, sort of tissue, and then expands to what is not anymore the water platform, because with all the river transportation and the small rivers, in fact, there's a sort of a not so nice terrain, because it's almost level by the sea level. But in fact, the lower middle-aged city develops and occupies this sort of swamp area with the same sort of tissue. And as you can see, walls are expanding because they still enclose the city. One hill, two hills, and another uphill, which is already a 17th century, more similar to an orthogonal grid city. On late 15th century, there is a move from the royal palace that originally was on the castle to the waterfront, and this wall that was built here is torn down because it's the beginning of a very important historical period in our history, which is the discovery period, where there is sort of a strategy for sailors going overseas, trying to discover the sea way to eastern India. You know a little bit about that, Vasco da Gama and all these sailors. It's interesting how this period affects the city, because what was originally closed city with walls becomes a very important interface between the city and the water. It's important. All the intense activity of the port starts from the custom control to shipbuilding activity, and the royal palace, it's transferred from the uphill castle to the waterfront. City of Lisbon, it's a quite interesting case of what we can consider a resilient city, because on 1755, 18th century, we had the whole package, which means we had a tremendous earthquake followed by a tsunami, and then followed by a big fire that went on a long time. And the city, the existing city, was destroyed for 2/3. It's the majority, but lots of people were killed. And in the king that ruled in that moment, and his prime minister, Marquis de Pombal, they had to face the construction of a total new modern city. What you see here is an interesting sketch of the architects. In fact, they were military engineers, but in fact they acted like architects, of the two layers of the previous existing organic middle-aged tissue and the new urban pattern, which is totally different. It's a perpendicular grid that works between a waterfront square and an hinterland square, which is mainly the market square. And in fact, the whole fabric, it's built in a sort of a perpendicular porosity between waterfront and hinterland. and it acts as actually sort of a exchange activity between everything that comes and goes by sea and everything that comes and goes from hinterland. This is interesting how the very first move of Marquis de Pombal, in fact, is after the ruins of the earthquake, tear them out and make it a sort of a new flat ground for the city. And this solved the very first problem, which was the flooding, continuous flooding of the old ex-swamp areas of the Middle Age seats for almost 3.5 meters. So this will be 12 feet high, which is solved the flooding problem. And the second thing, it's how this fabric, urban fabric, is built. It's very interesting because what you see here, it's an original plan of what is in yellow, the new modern city, and what is in pink, what remains from the middle-aged city. So as you can see, mainly it remains on the side hills, and the new city occupies the center. This is a typical Enlightenment concept of the 18th century, which means that the city is thought from the public space to the built buildings or to whatever is built. And why it is, I say this, it's because, in fact, the city is built with 3 instruments. The very first is the layout. Layout is mainly what we say, what is private in yellow, what is public space. I used to say normally, you can recognize very easily the evolution and the story of a city just looking to the void pattern of the city. What is the void pattern? If you look here and you imagine this sort of cul-de-sac, so very narrow streets, it's also a steep city. It's staircases and sort of organic labyrinthic tissue like a kashba because it's Arab origin. But it's a totally different void system from the new modern Enlightenment city. You see white is public, it's void, yellow, it's built. And this city is built with this layout, tool number 1. Tool number 2, it's the exhaustive study of the facades of the in all length of the streets. Facades are built mainly working with 3 types, but they have a sort of a first floor, we call ground floor, which normally were for craftsmanship activities. Then you have 3 floors, and you have a sort of rooftop floor. Of course, you see, they learned from the earthquake. They have these fire-cut walls to protect from later, this natural catastrophes like the earthquake, but in this case, the fire. So tool number 1, tool number 2, and the only tool number 3, which is one single section for the construction of the whole blocks. Why? Because it's quite wide block, so you need to bring natural light in the middle. You need to bring, for the first time, you're talking of infrastructures, we're talking of sewage, we're talking of rainwater, but also sewage system, because of course in the medieval age, the sewage was the street, the void system, no sewage. So it was when there was an epidemic, pest or something like that, they would die like crazy, it was terrible. So modern city now introduces this infrastructure, and as you can see, the road is for the first time dividing, wheel traffic from pedestrian traffic. With these 3 tools, you can imagine that the city is thought upside down. I mean, it's thought from the public interface, because the public void is a 3-dimensional. It's we're talking of the threshold notion, of it's very clear the pattern of the historical, I mean, hippodamic grill city, but then you have the elevation, so the quality of the public space is really controlled. We have no any sort of internal plan of what's going there for the reconstruction of the city. So, in fact, it's a moment where is typical Enlightenment concept, and you have the Royal Square here, which is also typical from this period, which is mainly the big void, which is built in the honor of the king, where the statue of the king occupies the center. So this is a sort of respect, distant space, because we're talking 18th century, we're talking of absolute power of the king. And this goes with this representation, construction of. But the interesting issue for me is that, in fact, cities, and this is why I'm talking mainly of thinking the city from the common share space to the inner space, to the private inner space. I will show quite quickly a recent intervention of a project made together with João Pedro Falcão and Campos, a young architect, a competition. Most of the projects I'm going to show you, they come out of competitions because it's very common in Portugal, which is the headquarters of the National Bank of Portugal, which in fact occupied this block of the original Pombal layout. As you can see, we made this presentation because the wall system, there's not anymore the wall system here, but there was an original wall that archaeologists thought that it would be some remains in this building. This is the block of the siege of the State Bank, and it's an interesting block because on the top of it, like there and like there were built churches. It's interesting because on the remake of the city of Lisbon, churches had to be to be inserted as urban fabric on the block and not as an isolated object. So this is an existing situation that you can see here. I mean, this is the town hall building, and just in the town hall square, and on the corner you have this facade of the church that you can see here, some aspects, that belongs to this block that you can see more or less here. And this was a building where gradually, it was built on 18th century, gradually, the siege of the State Bank of Portugal occupied this block, but they didn't occupy the church space. The church, in fact, had a fire on late 19th century. It was almost, it has never been recovered. It was not in use anymore. And the bank bought it in 1935 and used it in a very strange way as a sort of a safety garage. And inside the halter, they built a sort of a solid steel and concrete triple height safe to keep part of the gold lingots, you know, of the State Bank. It's a very strange story. Of course, this construction destroyed part of that. So there was a competition. We entered to recover all the block, and I will show you quite quickly what we did. In fact, the typical block of Pombal, as you can see, had their own small courtiers that I showed on the section before. They were used for ventilation, but also for bringing natural light. The block that was used by the bank was completely busy, occupied with ducts, air conditioning, all the infrastructures, so it was not in use. One of the moves that we said, let's get rid of that. We make an underground gallery and remove all that so that we can bring natural light again. And since the altar space of the church has been destroyed, we can create a sort of a big window, vertical window, so we can visually connect the space of the original courtyard to the void of the church, which is mainly a multi-purpose hall, actually. There is a museum that occupies the spaces around, and it's been used as a multi-purpose hall for lectures, concerts, whatever goes, and activity. In fact, this museum is playing a sort of cultural activities, so it goes there. This is the administration of the bank area. You see it in the section, I mean, the void of this 18th century church, which of course has been restored, it's been rebuilt, and the original courtyard of the block, and you can see through it. This is the ground floor, so it's at the whole main entrance there. This was the altar. It was very much damaged. You will show the restoration. So we profit from that opportunity to create this connection, visual connection to the courtyard. We created a new sort of infrastructure, vertical core, where you have the lifts, freight elevators, staircases, but also all the piping and ducting. And it's also anti-seismic sort of a concrete core because, of course, it's we have to deal with this seismic static. Lisbon is a very exposed seismic activity city, as it was shown on the 18th century. This is the basement floor. We try, when we start to dig to remove the infrastructure, then we had to go for an alternative way, because there were archaeologists discover a piece of the original wall that I showed before that was there. So now it's part of the museum. You can go and visit it. Okay, this is quickly. This is the top floor where we just had a big skylight. So that a lot of natural light can go inside. And very fast I can show you as I told you before, all the facades of the city of Pombal, they are still represented in watercolor. So we got the original facades. This is it's a heritage classified, all the area. And we just make a small change because we don't know exactly why. The main facade of the church was not symmetrical. This part was built up to here. So we decided, we met with the Heritage Institute, and of course they agreed to have this facade as the other one, and we added this new wall here, and in the angle we just added a new situation, which is part of the museum space, where you have the stone corner, then we change it into a corner window in glass, so when you are inside the museum, you have a sort of a diagonal perception of the square that is just on the front of it. So, okay, ground floor plan. This will be the main entrance from here. This is the reception for the museum. People come here, they enter, they have, the restrooms there. Then they go around for 2 levels because the museum are using the spaces around the main assembly space. And there you can go, of course, it's a safety protected mobility, but you can proceed to the control working spaces of the bank. This is an intermediary level, so you can move from one side to the other. So you cross this window, vertical window, and you can have a perception of both space from one side on the other. This is an archaeological register of everything that was found, and will be part of the museum, like the piece of the original medieval wall that was still there, some remains of the previous city before the earthquake. And some visions of archaeological discoveries, some aspects of a restoration going on. As you can see, the altar space was quite destroyed, so we are preparing to make this sort of a vertical window there, and restoring also all the wooden structure, remaking it's a light sort of a gypsy or cardboard vault. It was already built like that on the 18th century. Some images, and some images of the final state of this all. As you can see on the top, the vertical window, and how it has managed. We can show some details because, of course, we decided in this restoration to leave some of the scars of the building. I mean, it's part of the history of the building. So we made not exactly a restoration like in Italy, say how it was and as it was, but we left some signs of the time that were visible on the long life of the building itself. You can see here, for instance, there's a part of a Baroque work that was destroyed for this structure that was at the infill. Together, you see some visions of the inner courtyard with a big skylight above. There's a lot of light coming in. But of course, when you see in detail, we decide to keep this sort of scars that make also part of working with the time and within the time of the building itself. You can see here, no? But try to make a very dignified space that can be now reused in a different way. This is the reception of the museum. Then you can go up. You have lifts, but you can go upstairs and 2 levels moving around. Some details. This is some objects of the safe bank that are already pieces of the museum placed there. Finally, there was an artist intervention, a Portuguese artist, that made this sort of a golden panels with some inscriptions. It's very nice work. Maybe I show. There are some poems of Fernando Pessoa. It's a Portuguese famous poet that are inserted in this, and also on the big curtain that she proposed and designed it. It's very nice because we can close it or even open if you want to see through. And this can be used for different uses of the concert or different uses of this case. But this is a story. I was talking about this resilient city. It's interesting because normally we architects, in my generation at least, we used to think the cities are very permanent systems or built systems. As if you go back to the 60s and think of Aldo Rossi and this movement of tendenza in Italy, talking mainly of the permanence. The city has been a sort of a permanent fabric, which is not totally true. In fact, it's a long-lasting structure, but there are cycles which correspond to the living fabric, and this depends very much on the other argument that coexists with permanence, which is vulnerability. And vulnerability can be exposed due to natural causes like earthquakes, tsunamis, fires, but it can be a man-made planned vulnerability. We're talking about planning war, no? Like you see every day today in Iraq, in television, how a city can be, very well demolished in very short times. But eventually the most efficient vulnerability effect on the city is just abandon and no anymore use. And you know the story. I passed yesterday over this cattle market area in Kansas City. I mean, what you call brownfields. Contemporary city, it's a good example of what could be vulnerability on cities. Enormous areas of the cities in a moment come out of use. And of course, if there's no use, there's no life, and ruin comes in. But this does mean that you can reverse the cycle, because normally they have a lot of potential for recycling and reusing. But if we know in history that if nothing is done, and we have a lot of historical cities in Europe, maybe you talk about what is the Pompeii, for instance, or I don't know, many Roman cities where by any motive there was not any more use, and they become archaeological fields, as you know. So this is an interesting issue about what mean the life of buildings and the life of a city. This is nothing to do with it. This is a brand new building that was designed in a small Portuguese village, 100 miles from Lisbon, more or less, which is in the top of a sort of a park. And it's a building, it's a very strange building. In fact, it's a completely blind container that would have inside sort of a virtual audiovisual representation, because in fact this building is a sort of a monument to a medieval important battle between Portugal and Castile, the reign of Castile in Spain, because it was an important independent issue in that moment. So this is what we call an interpretation center for this battle. And they asked me to design it, and what is the program? Program is mainly audiovisual context. We have a sort of a small circuit. Visitors come here, and they see a sort of a sculpture representation of the battle. Then they enter this sort of scenery. It's constructed where there is a 10 minutes audiovisual that is telling the story of this battle. The battle was a clash between two different armies that the Portuguese won with a much smaller army, because they're using a tactic was brought by Portugal from England, that after the 100 years war on Europe, which was mainly a defensive tactic, so a smaller army could win a battle, a much bigger army. So the building finally is a gate to the park, and on the left-hand side you have the public facilities, the bookshop, the small shop, you have restrooms, and then you have the visit to the right. The section, it's interesting because in fact it's a big sort of concrete mix of, you'll see afterwards, that it has a sort of a hole carved in between. And this hole is a sort of a negative, or a sort of a house shape, that it's something like that. What is the idea? This is the gate to the park. It's a small, very small town, in fact, a public park. And this is supposed to be a sort of a monument. Monument comes from the Latin word of memento. It's trying to tell the story of the moment of the battle. So we designed this as a sort of a clash of a uniform, compact building that is cut more or less in 1/3 by this sort of extrusion of a void like a house. If you can imagine the clash of two different dimensions of armies that clash together, battle for their purpose. So we would like to celebrate the common house or non-existing house of those who died on the battle, either from one army or the other. So this carved void, in fact, it's represented by the way through to the park, and the monolithic volume, in fact, it's then you can think which one is the winner, which one is the loser. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's in fact, what is important is to to celebrate what was done there, and mainly those who died for their ideals. So it's a sort of a concrete exposing the materials are specific, which learned quite from this clay construction, which is piling and putting some stones in together to this is a small sketch. When it rains a lot, the water is always not running through the clay. It's pouring down. So you have this sort of layer effect. We saw some aspects of the building. This is in sort of like the old way of constructions. We have the wooden elements, and then you pile up the concrete and you insert this sort of a stone. You have some visions of the this is inner view of the simulation of this is this is audiovisual performing, which is taken out of an artist representation of a tapestry that used to go there. So everything is told around a sort of a big black box, and then you go around and you have a sort of a black box camera that you go in, and you have sort of a simulation of this artist studio. Then everything moves and the screen comes on and tells the history of the battle. So people visit, go around, and then when they get out, they just have, normally they go in groups, they go up to the entrance. They have this very long bench where they can sit and look into the park, to the garden, and finally come back to the entrance. And the way out, as you can see, this is materially, we use also inner sort of pigment, this red pigment to simulate this material. And you have a sort of a night view of the building. Next project, in fact, it's also a new project for tourist apartments or tourist small houses in a sort of a big beach resort in our coast. We have hundreds of kilometers of sandy beaches, which is quite nice. So there was a master plan, and we were invited to create 20 small, shall we say, dwelling, small apartment houses, 2-bedroom apartments. But it was required that not to change so much the topography of the site and work it in a very landscape way. So this is a project, as I was talking before, about thinking the project not so much as an object, a self-reference object, but something that can be thought from the common space, common shared space, from the common void space, common shared void space to the private inner space of the house. This is a representation. It's mainly a conceptual image that it's talking about 2 levels mainly. Then I'll show the very first conceptual model that we did, because in fact we're talking of a dune, quite not so steep dune. You have the road from the resort that goes here, and up there, up the dune, you have some common shared equipments like some tennis courts, a swimming pool, and whatever. So we just walked. It's a very topographic project and maybe landscapey as well. We work with the level of the road and the top of the sand, and we digged this sort of carved, this sort of linear courtyards, and each courtyard will be part of one single house. I will explain. So you come here, you can park here, you have a sort of small gates and you enter the courtyards, but maybe I'll show better what is going on. You have here the main road. Then you have in black, you have every sort of finger. In fact, there are two houses here. Then you have a thick wall between one and the other. And this thick wall is also having some spaces for both houses, like grill spaces, like spaces where you can keep your outside furniture, whatever. And then you have your own private courtyard in gray. Then on the top of which you have a staircase so you can reach the common shared swimming pool or tennis courts. This is the facade to the road, to the street. In fact, it's a metallic facade where you have some gates there. You can enter the courtyards, and then you see how it works. I mean, this is a metallic sort of grid facade you see here. You park the car. You can bring the car in if you want, but there's no need to do it. So this is the private courtyard to this house here. No? This house here, it's open to this courtyard. So if you enter here, you have a living. You have a common shared sort of kitchen space that can work together. You have one bedroom there and one bedroom there. No? The other house, it's moving to the next courtyard. And it's private to this courtyard, and it's similar. You have entrance, living, kitchen, one bedroom, and one bedroom. The dividing thick wall is putting to one side the grill spaces, some other spaces, and the opposite to the other side. The section, you can see here, you enter the courtyard, and it's, in fact, there are stone walls, and you have garden terraced rooftops, because it was also required that this should be the sort of green platform, landscape platform. So you can use your courtyard. It's narrow and twisting courtyard. It's with some trees, not so many inside. You can live outside and inside. You have your facade of your house with the main living spaces and all. And on the top, you can reach the swimming, common shared swimming, and all the spaces. So here it's a sort of a model of this was under construction, but as maybe you know, Portugal from 2011 on, we have a very strong economical crisis. So most of these work sites have to stop, and it's really a shame. Finally, it was not yet finished. I hope it will be one day, but I can show how it was being built, so it can imagine a little bit how the courtyard will be. Of course, we'll have trees here, and this is to be removed. We'll have gardens upwards, so, and connecting to the common shared swimming pools. The opposite view to the main street where cars can park, but of course you frame the sky, this sort of organic vision. It's always very interesting to how you can frame, you can look, and how important it's the light that comes in and all that sort of things. Okay, so let's move to a very small town in central Portugal called Leiria. It's also a quite old city. In fact, it grew on the basis of a hill where there's a medieval castle, which now is mainly visited by tourists. It's the real icon of the city of Leiria. And it's interesting because the middle-aged city grew on the lower level, and it's mainly based on very narrow void system, because it's really originally a middle-aged sort of a void pattern that comes from the cathedral space to another square. But as is happening almost in the Portuguese cities. We have a big problem in these old fabric tissues because they are not being used. And as I told you, when there is no use, buildings start to become a ruin. And there's a big problem because few people are living here, mainly elderly people. And there's now becoming a sort of a new effort to try to reuse and rehabilitate these areas. So I can show you a vision from the Castle Hill to this downtown. You see the cathedral with its void, and you hardly see a very narrow street that goes to a sort of a triangular void space there. But when you look here, I mean, the streets are so narrow that people who used to live there, they hardly see the castle. There's the main square, which of course you can see the castle. And there is a very strange void here, which in fact was an original typography that worked here up to 1940s. Then it was dismissed. No one went out. Everything, roofs just fall down. As you can see, lots of roofs here going around. They are falling down, and this is a symptom. This is a sign that, in fact, life is not taking. Abandon, it's coming here, so the city is declining. And I was invited by the mayor of the city to build here a new small equipment for, I mean, it's just a small opportunity to try to reanimate, to bring life to this city. It's a small elderly people day center together with young people, sort of a small mediatheque. And it's interesting because when I came here and visit with the mayor, I entered and I just reached there and they say, it's a shame that you built it because the void, it could be very nice to make a small square. So you could see the castle because you don't hardly see it. Okay, he said it's okay, but I promised the electors that I would have this built here, so I have to build it. Okay, so we started to think about it, and as you can see it, it's right here. Look, this is the main street of the medieval. It's, what is it? Something like 12 to 15 feet wide. Can hardly go a car inside. Okay, here a car can go, but not here. And this part, in fact, it was completely abandoned. So we moved and said, okay, let's think. So what we've done, it's we worked also with a void. I mean, this building is thought as a, so you have the main street here, and we tried to put the small mediatheque space in a sort of volume that is mostly suspended here. And the day center of elderly people in 3 levels in this case, in this place here. So you maybe, I mean, this is, you hardly see it because the model is, it's more or less this. But the interesting is the relation, the visual relation with the castle. So this is the model. This is the main street called the Rua Direita. It's very narrow. You pass here, and you can look to your left-hand side, and you have an empty square, which is 6%. It's much lower than Piazza del Campo in Siena. You go up, and you have the elderly people center. You have a small coffee interface here. Then you continue up in the ramp and you reach the mediatheque here. But you have the lower level main street here, and the other very narrow entrance there. Here you see the small tiny square. In fact, we're talking a very small project which goes up, and you may enter the square from this corner in a public staircase there. Or either you enter this day center for the elderly people here. You have a sort of small reception, lift here, activity room at the ground floor level. You can go along a narrow gallery, which is also used as an exhibition space that you can go inside, but you can also see it from the public street outside, because you have a quite long glazed window that you can see it. And then you reach a staircase also that you can meet on upper level. You can reach the Mediatek. But here you see, you go to this small square. This is the cafe space. It's a sliding glass panel, so in summertime you can open and you can share a wonderful terrace outside. You can bring tables here, and it's a common space. Or you go up the ramp and meet the Mediatek space. It's quite a large space where activities take place, and you can see to the square. And finally, on the third floor, you have big activity rooms can be used for multi-purpose uses for the elderly people. But you have the lift and the main staircase. And the section, this is important. Some projects can be told or described just by the section or by the plan. Of course, the section here is very important because, when you pass here, you look to the left and you discover your small square with the terrace and the cafe there. And then with the activity rooms above, this is the Mediatek. But since this is a glazed facade, when you go up, it acts like a mirror. So you will see the image of the castle reflected. Of course, it's an image. It's not a real castle. No? But you go up, you turn, and you discover the real castle view. This is the side facade. This is the gallery. In fact, it's a gallery that you can see just walking on the street. This is the elderly people volume. This is the opposite facade. So the main street is there. You can see the main square. You reach this level. You can proceed to the Mediatek. But I will show some pictures. This is the main street. As you can see, it's quite narrow. The cathedral on the top. Then you move here to the corner, and you go around the building. You see the gallery from outside, or you can see it from along here. You can see it from inside. There's a small exhibition about a poet who lived quite close. And it's also a connecting space between elderly people and young people. Or you can, on the corner, opposite corner, you go up to the square, or just on this very narrow space, you can enter the day center, or you can pass through, you can go around. This is a window for one of the activity rooms. You can go on. Now you see the real castle. But if you go on, you start to see the reflected image of the iconic building of the city. It's just an image. Or if you come from the main street and you turn left, you enter here, go up the square, and turn back. You see the Mediatek. This is sun protection, sun shading system. And of course, you see the reflection not only of the castle, but of the center that is now trying to recover. And it's interesting because when the cafe is used, these sliding doors will open. And by night, for instance, you have the inner light. I don't have a slide for that. I'm sorry. But since the castle is an icon, it's also very strongly lit by night. So it's interesting image that you have the layers of the reflected image and the light that goes inside the building. So you have different aspects, depend on where you are. Of course, if you reach the upper level, you have this total horizontal framing of the historical center with the castle on the center. And if you go up the castle and you look down, this facade is reflecting the square itself, the small square, which apparently doubles the, it's very tiny and narrow dimension. You can see the state of how it goes, this abandoned process, which we hope this can be just a small act for two. Many other moves are now taking place, and that's quite important. So now it's jumping to Coimbra. It's a very old city, Roman-founded city. It's the oldest university in Portugal. It was founded in the 12th century, 13th century, 1280 something. When, in fact, they're commemorating 755 years of the university. Originally, the university was downtown in this street there. It's a hilly. There's a very important hill. It's like an acropolis. Also with their wall system in the Middle Age, Romans founded through a cross of a Roman road, which was very important, and mainly important where there was a Roman bridge over here when it crossed the rivers. As you know, rivers were the main infrastructure, transportation structures. So in this cross, as usual, Roman grids, territorial grids are very important to the foundation of the cities. And the foundation takes place uphill, in this place here exactly, where you have this red dot. It was the old Cardo, is the north-south main axis of the Roman city, and this is a decumanus, which is not a straight decumanus because it's very steep, the hill. And as you know, where you have the decumanus and the Cardo crossing, you have the Roman Forum. Forum means the center of the city where every sort of activities, religious, trials, judgments, but also cultural activities and market activities, exchange activities take place. Is the real core of the Roman founded city. Of course, there's not any remains of the original Forum. What exists here is a museum that came here on 1910, but in fact, this construction is a very strange construction of a sort of a condensed 2,000 years of history of the city of Coimbra. As you can see, there is also a Moorish Arab settlement of a cashback called the Al Medina, that was reused on the Middle Age, and up to now it's still a residential area. You have the Romanesque cathedral where the cloister means 12th century, 1140 something. You go up, you have this Jesuitic college, which is 16th century. When the king decides to move the university uphill and create a sort of a new campus on the top of this acropolis, he offers the royal palace for the center of the new university. But you also see this building from 1950s, which is a period of dictatorship in Portugal, with Salazar, which is totally different times. This is very nice in architecture. I used to say architects have, not as historians who try to analyze the city layers as sort of a permanent sort of cut on time, and so it's normal because they analyze the correspondence of cultural values with artistic and architectonic products. So you can come to styles. Styles, you have Romanesque style, you have Renaissance, you have Gothic, you have Renaissance, you have Baroque, you have neoclassic, and finally you have sort of a modern But for an architect, it's interesting to see how a city can grow in different contemporaneities. I mean, an architect that works here on the Romanesque, when he's dealing the project time condition of the project is always contemporary, in my opinion. We work in a very short time period with our time values, and we take decisions about, so we work really within our own time and with its time. Originally, contemporaneous means work con il tempo. It's within the time, with its own time. Palladio or any sort of historical architecture, when they were building, they were being contemporaneous. So I look at the cities as a sort of different layers of different contemporaneous elements, which had been sometimes added, sometimes destroying previous existing buildings. Altogether, to say that this is a very strange building, a typical building that you see here. In fact, when you look at this, you discover all of a sudden a superb Renaissance portico designed by an Italian architect who come to work for the Bishop of Coimbra in the middle of the 16th century. You can find a Baroque church there, which is part of this group. You can find a fragment of a Renaissance chapel that is strangely there because it's not complete. And the story is that everything is built over a platform that is a Roman fabric, cryptoportico, which means cryptoportico is a tectonic Roman structure, 2 levels of vaults to transform a terrain where building was not possible, I'm sorry, because it's very steep, transforming into a sort of a table that would be the basis of, or the platform basis for the forum. Forum does exist, but the cryptoportico is almost as it was built by the Romans, except one missing piece there that we know that was destroyed by Filippo Terzi on the 16th century to make the foundation of the Renaissance portico. Of course, today you would not be allowed to make this sort of project. The heritage institution wouldn't let you demolish a part of the Roman Forum. But the interesting thing of this building is that on 1910, it has been the Roman Forum, later a lot of uses. It's a fragmentary condition where you have fragments of different time periods of the architecture history of Coimbra. And it's sort of a condenser of the architecture history of Coimbra. And this condition is interesting because it condenses inside fragments what simultaneously we've been built around the city. So when you are inside and you look outside, you can confront what was building around. So 1910, the bishop removes from here, and this is occupied for the Museum of the City of Coimbra, where there's a very important Renaissance collection, mainly sculpture. And on 1998, there's an important competition goes for refurbish this museum. And we won the competition, and then we had to work. I mean, it's really hard to work in 2 months, taking decisions of a building that concentrates. This is really an exceptional case, 2,000 years of history. And of course, this is a monument. It's an important heritage. We had precise rules where we can build new and where we had to make restorations. But this is a model we made for the competition where you show one of the levels of the vaults of the Roman cryptoportico and a reconstruction of what could have been the Roman Forum made by an archaeologist based on the tectonics, because as you know, this Roman architecture is a compression system, tectonic system. But of course the Forum doesn't exist. And now this is what we suggest for the project of the new museum. It was a major intervention foreseen here in this area, and two different small plots that were not built, so we could build brand new here. This is a section. As you can see, the two levels of the Roman cryptoportico, then the platform of the original Nov9 forum, and the Terzi Renaissance portico, the Baroque church section, this is the main courtyard, and the two buildings new buildings built where it was possible to build them. So quickly moving, this is the lower floor. It's a very narrow, middle-aged Gothic street. When we start building, archaeologists discover Roman remains here, but were not known, so we had to readapt the project. And this is very interesting because you have the main Roman sewage, the Cloaca Romanes, and you had the limit of what originally was the private space from Roman, sort of Roman shops there. This, of course, it was a very important archaeological discovery, so we decided together with the team of the museum that we should keep it visible and visits can go in. But then we moved to the second plot where we have technical areas and mainly archive and deposits of the collections. And of course, all the new stuff of freight elevators, staircases, and all the air conditioning systems. And you have a big vertical shaft which is built out of the perimeter of the cryptoportico. This is the perimeter of the original Roman cryptoportico. When you go up, and this was the original facade, there was a discovery of a small Roman fountain, and people can come here and go across a big staircase and reach the other level and discover these two completely different periods of construction of the big facade of the Roman cryptoportico. And first level of the cryptoportico is a structure, is mainly a dome structure that goes around in the second level, is much more complex. You see the original vault system was cut here with this wall to support the Renaissance portico above. These are already new exhibit areas. This is administration around the courtyard. Then you move to the main entrance level that is here through a gate of the old palace of the bishops. So here is, it's the bookshop of the museum, side activities for groups, restrooms, some spaces for exhibition. You enter here. This is the new construction that keeps inside the fragment of a Renaissance chapel. Then you walk here, you go around. You have a strange fragment of a pre-Romanesque church that existed here with a fragment of a cloister that also existed as it was and where it was. The not so interesting thing is that this chapel, which is a masterpiece of Renaissance architecture and sculpture, was transported here on 1960 something, and it was out-of-scale object of the museum, which is already a museum. So we had to build, it was foreseen to build sort of a big container to protect this and make it visible when you go around the museum. So you move around. This is the Baroque church, who is now the auditorium of the museum. You can access from the inside or from the outside. You move around, then you can come up to the common space where you have your ticket, cloakrooms, and so on. You either go to the restaurant, new restaurant with its terrace outside, or you go downstairs or go upstairs to the last level where you have the paintings, Renaissance paintings. You go around, you have all the silver works and whatever. Then you go to proceed to the ex-residential bishop spaces where all the applied arts are exhibited, and then you go out. When you move around, you have particular spaces like this window, like this window, like this window, where you can stop and look outside to the city, because in fact you are sort of seeing sort of a condensed, fragmentary condition of different time layers of where simultaneously the city is growing around. So you can see, for instance, here the cathedral, or a very beautiful small medieval square with a Gothic small church and so on. So you can stop and look outside. I mean, this is the construction. It's a quite light structure for the new container. You can see how this chapel was before. In fact, it's a very soft sandstone that was exposed to the weather condition, and this is why it was required on the competition that we should create a protection sort of space to the exhibition of this chapel. We will see afterwards how it goes, and I'll quickly show you around. This is a section. You can see the new container with the old chapel, which is out-of-scale objects, some altars that are posted there. This section of the altar of the Baroque church within another container. This is the section, part of the cryptoportico, the lower exhibition areas, the terrace level and the upper level that you go around. An orthogonal section where we see the cryptoportico and the terci Renaissance portico. You can have a side entrance to the restaurant, and if you go upstairs, you can reach here, then you go, you have a side entrance because restaurant is open also for dinner when the museum is closed. You have a wonderful panoramic view to the historical city and to the river. This is the old Decumanus and Gothic. It's a very narrow street. Like you have the new administration building, the new building, and you turn to the left. And this is a grill. When you pass, you take a look and you discover inside the remains of the Roman sewage cloaca and what rests. So you can see it because we have a skylight lit that you can see here the detail. You have this natural light going inside, or you carry on up. You can turn left and go upstairs, public space, and see what was the Roman fountain. This is the facade of the Roman cryptoportico. There was this missing part. We just suggested to create this sort of grid that you see here to give continuity to the whole dimension. Is close to 90 meters long, and it's also used to put inside all the air conditioning, heat pumps and whatever. So, but when you pass in between those, you can really understand what was the dimension of this Roman fabric cryptoportico. And you have some views of the inside of the Roman cryptoportico. In fact, this is one of the masonry systems, the Opus Cementitium, that has, as I told you, 2,000 years of history. You can go around and see the exhibition, and you can pass the cut that was made on 16th century. This is the 16th century wall of Philippe Terci to support the Renaissance portico. So you can go around and you discover the two different contemporaneities of fabrics in this narrow gap that goes through. Then you can reach the main courtyard. So you enter there. It was the original gate entrance to the bishop's palace. This is the Baroque church that is there. You can switch. You see the Terci portico. Then you enter and you go around. There you see the Middle Age remains of the cloister, and it was there. Of course, we had this was put here in 1960s. You had to deal with it. It's an out-of-scale object of a museum. So we made a very important skylight between both to create a different natural lighting, intense natural lighting in this space. So you can mostly, at least I hope, understand that what was the outer part of the cloister and the inner part of the cloister, and in the fragment that was here, how it is. Then you can move around. You can pass. This is an upper view of the second floor. You can see the skylight there, and you can move around. So you go from here. This is the back of the chapel. This is the backwards of the altar of the Baroque church. It was, in fact, a residual space that now is an important space of the museum. Now we're entering the sculpture part of it. All the design of the exhibition worked together with the team of the museum, but we detailed all the exhibition layouts. This is some exhibition of this is a middle-age sculpture of a horseman, and as I told you, it's a very good collection of a sculpture. You go around the chapel, the Renaissance chapel, and then you go to this main container that we made to protect all these fragments. So you can see it from the ground floor, but you can also see it from upper floor, where you can see outside, but also some details inside. You can turn. There's another window. We also, mainly on this architectonic and stone sculpture, we worked a lot with natural light. That is very important, natural light, because natural light in a way brings in the notion of the passing of the time. I know it's different kinds of illumination, but of course there are some filter conditions because there's also the conservation issue. So you can move around, and from the upper deck, from the upper level, you can look down, or you can stop and look outside and see how this on the 12th century is also a part of the history of some fragments that you have inside of the city. So I was talking that this condition of architecture of the history of Coimbra was very important to discover. This is the painting museums. Of course, here we mostly have only artificial lighting. It's important for the painting, not to have ultraviolet. So here it's the restaurant level. Here was not working. Now it's quite successful because it has this terrace with a wonderful view outside, where you can recognize the different time layers of the city. This is an important piece also for the recovery of the historical center of Coimbra. Here are also some abandoned problems. And when I designed the competition, I always say we start from a condenser building of all the history of Coimbra, but now we try to propose a sort of a catalyst building, which with its active cultural activities can contribute to make a sort of a new life coming into the historical center. So we said the ideal was to recreate, as it was originally the Roman Forum, as an activity, intense activity, life catalyst of the city. And finally, I will briefly show very quickly to a small project in Lisbon. This is 19th century representation, cartography or plan of the city of Lisbon. And where you see this is a private park, typical romantic park, which was built by an aristocrat guy, sort of a count, that had his palace here. He built all this park with his French garden above, geometrical garden, because he used to make big receptions. He was the director of the opera house in Lisbon, so he was very fond of music. So he built a small theater, just beside the palace. And, but this poor aristocrat died in misery in late 19th century because he spent all the money. And this was sold, bought, different uses, and actually now is the siège of the Ministry of Education and Culture in Portugal. It's mainly the siège of the minister himself. And the old small theater was a ruin. So, I mean, some years ago, I was called by the minister, and he asked me, this is the actual situation of the site. This is still remains, and this was the original park. You hardly can recognize it because it actually is the zoo of Lisbon. You can see the elephant pavilions, you can see dolphins over there, you can see all sorts of monkeys, lions, whatever. The main aisle, where was the main entrance to the palace, you can still recognize. I mean, there was a side entrance, which now is the main entrance to the ministry. You can see this is a typical, with all this high-speed, this is a connection to one of the main, our Golden Gate suspended bridge in the Tagus. So all this infrastructure stuff, but this is what happens. The side, old street where you have the side entrance, on the left is the palace, on the right is the ruin of what has been a very small theater used for private representation. But this guy, in fact, he made his private opera representation, some concerts, some activities. This theater burned also in the late 19th century, and it was ruined. The minister called, I don't know what to do here. We don't use it for theaters, but I don't like to have this ruined. So we said, okay, let us work on it. Let's think about it. And we said there has been some added constructions which were quite strange along this road. But we entered inside and were really surprised by the density of this sort of also scars of a theater. This is the stage space of the theater, which is much bigger than auditorium, public area. So this guy, in fact, representation, opera was important, and mainly important to have a good stage space. But in fact, the fire burnt everything that was wooden built. And but this is really amazing, the capacity of express the thickness of time here. So we just built up an image, and an image is an image. But an image, for us, it's very important, not exactly to be realistically trying to foresee what's going to be there, but to work on a sort of a concept, because this image, in fact, is saying something that this theater was mainly important for us as a sort of a void space. So the main issue, let's recover the ruin and create a void. And with this image, we went to the minister and explained, okay, so our idea is to freeze this ruin, cover it, and you have a void, and you can use it as you want. It will be a small multi-purpose space. You can use it for seminars, small seminars. You can, if you want to make a concert, if you want to have a reception, you can use it. He was quite happy, and we start to work on the project. It's a very small project. You can see it here. In dark gray, while in gray, it's what remained from the ruin. In light, it's what we propose to add. In fact, what you add is a very light construction, transparent. It's a glazed area that follows the street. So you can see inside, but you can also see outside. Then the minister say, okay, since you have this, maybe we have a public entrance you can share with the city, with the communities that live around, so they can also use the space, they can enter there. And you have a courtyard, and you just had a sort of a small cafeteria that can also be used for receptions. And you can use the space as you want. The funny thing is that actually some concerts are holding there, small concerts, because everything is small. Normally the orchestra takes place here and the public goes there, and it works quite well. Sorry, what is this about? I mean, you have the ruin here, but you see there's a new skin around. In fact, it's a sort of a colored, particular texture, concrete, that is creating the original volumetric box of the theater, but not adding and just sustaining the ruin as well, but not adding anything else. And you can use it. You also use these spaces. You can use that spaces. And this is the side facade from the street. It's a very strange. You can see the volume of the original theater. It's like a mask. I mean, this was quite rough construction. But then you have a stone-built sort of a fronton with these columns with the Sphinx there in a sort of a marble stone, which is sort of a mask that is facing the palace. But this is the facade to the park, the opposite facade. And this is a small construction material that we used. The ruin and the new box, the new skin, which is a monomaterial even on the roof. You see it as a big block, like a monolith, and the added building is very, very light, very transparent. Here you go. This is you can see the representation of this guy, it's the Sphinxes, and it has a Roman phrase that's here, says, here the habitudes of the man will be punished. He was a moralist, this guy. But then you go around and you see how it faces the old street, the new volume with this concrete shape, monolithic shape. Then you have the new building around. Then you reach the public entrance. There's a gate that you can open. People can enter. You go to this courtyard. At the right-hand side, you have a small cafeteria. You can make a terrace outside. You can move around. This is the park side. You can also, from the courtyard, go to the gardens there. Then you go back to the main entrance, and you enter the foyer. As you can see, the foyer is very narrow. It's quite tall. It's a very vertical space. We just rebuilt it with some new acoustical protection, reflection, absorbent areas. But you go some steps up, and you enter the main hall. Some details here. Finally, this is a detail of a bench. And finally, you enter the space, the ruin. And as we represented on the image, the only thing we made, in fact, it was sort of a small skylight. It's interesting because, as Louis Kahn used to say, even to see the darkness, you need some bit of light. And you can use it as you want, as you wish, either using what originally was the stage space or what was the public space. As you can see, the limits of the ruin were continued with this new concrete fabric. There's a sort of a new layer of our time. When you pass aside, you see the side space, which is quite transparent. Outside, you see the street. You can move on. It's to the public entrance, the opposite entrance, and you understand the courtyard. And finally, you can come to this image just to tell you that, in fact, this is a very important issue for us. I mean, beyond the image that we use for mainly conceptual work, this is mainly what we consider that is very the central importance of the void in architecture, because void, finally, they are a sort of life containers. We architects design the limits of the void and define the conditions, the atmosphere, the sound, not only the visuality, but as Peter Zonter says, the atmosphere, which means the temperature, those real issues that are important for life taking place inside, beyond the image and within the time. Sorry, that's finished. That's all. Maybe you ask some questions if there's time to do it. Okay?
Well, questions, folks? Goncalo said he would love to field a few questions, and we have a few minutes before we have to do.
Okay. Yep.
You talked about the city and how it can be vulnerable. How would you go about revitalizing the city? Would you keep doing small projects like those here in Piazza, or do you look for bigger scale?
Okay. I mean, revitalizing cities, maybe he's asking how can I keep revitalizing the cities. The first answer to your question is revitalizing cities is not only an architect issue. I mean, as you know, there's no architecture, there's no client. No? This has ever since been like that. Renaissance architects used to work for princes and for who had the mandate. But what is interesting in cities is that this is Herzog, from Herzog and de Meuron used to say, maybe the cities are the most complex humankind culture products, which means that mankind products. Of course, when you talk of the cities, you cannot talk who is the owner of the city. I'm quite sure we architects are not the owners. But I'm quite sure also that historians are not the owners. If you go to Italy, sometimes historians think they are, I mean, you cannot touch heritage. And I ask you why. Of course, heritage is very important, but heritage has been contemporaneous when it was built. Why you supposed to be the owner? I mean, city is something so complex that belongs to everyone and no one. So when you talk of the city, of course, you have to know what architect can do, but it's much more complex. To give an example, in Lisbon, for instance, first question, why the city decayed? No? Why the city was, because in this case was not an earthquake. No? Natural causes, it's good cause, and we know, but this is just abandoned. Why did the city decay? Why a brownfield exists? No? So what can you do? Yesterday we were discussing with the architect Vladimir in Design Center in Kansas City. They make a terrific work down there. I mean, just to see, but we're talking a lot about this ex-cattle market area. And I'm quite sure there's an enormous potential in that area. And architects, as he's working already there, can make a sort of a intellectual investment, but it can also work with communities, and that's very interesting in Kansas, what is being done there. You have some other examples. But of course, who's paying that afterwards? I mean, cities are also, you have to work with stakeholders, no? You have to work with politicians. Politicians are elected, so they represent. But you have to work with citizens as well, no? So finally, the city, but the question is for what the architect will do. And this is interesting because the main issue, I think, for revitalizing, we are in a culture, our contemporary condition of a culture, we are in a recondition. I mean, the words we use are becoming more and more with the prefix re, no? So we are recycling things. And if you think, well, architecture is always in a way taking existing situations and making a transformation, even a new house. The classic exercise of a small house in the desert, it's changing the condition of the desert. I mean, so in fact, architecture means starting for a pre-existent, it's a mental, mainly a mental activity, no? We have a very particular interesting condition as particular form of knowledge of architecture. We are normally generalistic, and we work in a transdisciplinary world. We need a lot to work. I had to work with historians and archaeologists in a building that has 2,000 years of history. They are very important. But so we are in a transdisciplinary. This is very specific of our own form of knowledge. But our product, of course, is work on the synthesis. Synthesis mainly, we always work in between situation. Project is a transitory tool to operate a transformation. You know? This is why I'd call it the condition of contemporaneity, because we work in a very short time period with value. Project is mainly a selection, sort of progression. And to select things for the project, you have to refuse things. There's no selection without rejecting. No? This is a classic with young students. To make a project, they put things and things and things. I remember teaching in Lausanne in Switzerland with this architect, Luigi Snozzi, is an incredible architect and an incredible professor of project designing. Students arrive with huge models. There's an incredible model shop in the Swiss schools. They have all types of things. And Snozzi looked at the model and took a piece of it and scratched it out. Wow, no? And then he asked the student, do you think it's better or worse? It's funny, you know, because normally people don't get and think the project is just adding. Of course, if you add a lot, you are building 3, 4 projects, but not one. And to make a good one project, you have to be you have to have critical sense. And this is the main issue of project is a learning opportunity. Every project is a learning. Even for me, when I have a new project, it's great. I mean, this is very important for you too. So our answer is mainly think what can recycle there. And if you reuse, for instance, existing building, you have to be aware because typologies hardly accept different, I mean, they're quite flexible, but of course, if you are changing an old cinema into a hotel, it's so different typologies, better tear down the cinema and make a new nice hotel, no? Because the cinema will be not there anymore. But, okay.
One more question, I think.
You're talking about most of the structures are made of sandstone. Do they have any limestone structures there, or is sandstone the primary?
I was talking of architecture and sculpture of 16th century in the sandstone that is exposed to quite aggressive atmosphere. No? So it's, you have all sorts of things. It's erosion. We know that's erosion, but it comes out of even of some fungus activity. It's a big problem. The main cathedral has a big problem to stop this process. But we know, we are quite aware that this was an inner chapel of a Renaissance church that was transferred there. So it should not have been exposed to. This is why the competition required to have a protection container, no? And of course it has been restored, and now apparently it's exhibited in atmospheric museums. As you know, we have a very straight control of humidity, temperature, and whatever, no? So we hope it will go.
Well, Goncalo, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Beautiful exhibition.